Nellie Nutgraf, the double best reporter in history. Book 2, Breaking News, Part 2. By Tom Engelberger. Performed by Ramon Diocampo. Chapter 4. General George Washington jumped on his horse and started riding for the river. Nellie ran alongside them, asking questions and taking notes with one hand and snapping pictures with the other. "Don't take my picture yet," cried the father of our country. "Let me put my hat on first." "Put your dentures in, too," said the horse. Click. Nellie got a photo of George Washington riding a horse and putting in his dentures. "Aw, man, Ben Franklin's gonna make fun of me if you print that. Here, let me take one," said George Washington. He grabbed the camera from Nellie, pointed it at himself, and invented the selfie. The picture turned out so well that it's now printed on the $1 bill. George Washington handed the camera back to Nellie, who was still running alongside him and his horse. Luckily, it was a pretty slow horse. When they got to the river, a rowboat filled with soldiers was waiting for them. Washington jumped off the horse and into the boat. Then Nellie jumped into the boat. And then the horse jumped into the boat. "Twinkle-hoof, I didn't know you were coming too," said George Washington to his horse. "I want to be in the painting too," said the horse. "Okay," said Washington. "Start rowing, men." The soldiers started a-rowing, and George Washington started a-standing majestically in the prow of the boat. "How do you spell prow?" Nellie asked. "P-R-O-W," said Twinkle-hoof. "I think we're sinking," said George Washington. "Are we sinking, guys?" "Yes," said the rowing soldiers. "There's too much weight in the boat. The reporter will have to throw her typewriter overboard. You don't mind, do you?" George Washington asked Nellie. "General Washington, this isn't just a typewriter," replied Nellie, also standing majestically in the prow. "It's a symbol of America's freedoms. The freedom to say, to write, to print, to think anything we want. This typewriter is what you and your men are fighting for." "Well, maybe you could throw part of it overboard," said George Washington. "Like just a few keys, because if we drown in the river, we won't be able to fight for, your typewriter." Nellie looked at the water trickling over the sides of the boat and knew he was right. She decided she could spare a couple of the keys she didn't use very much. She ripped out the Z key and threw it in the water. "Still sinking," said the soldiers. She tossed out the Q and the J. "Still sinking," said the soldiers. She dumped the P and the W. "That's better. One more should do it," said the rowing soldiers. "I guess I don't use the K very much," she thought. Before she could do anything, George Washington yanked out one of the letters and threw it into the river. "What letter was that?" gasped Nellie. "Just the E," said George Washington. "No!" shouted Nellie. "E is the most frequently used letter in the English language," explained Twinklehoof. "Gee, I never ever need it myself," said George Washington. "You just used it 9 times in that sentence," replied Nellie. "Egad!" he exclaimed. "We've stopped sinking," said the soldiers, "and we made it across the river." George Washington started to step out of the boat. "Wait!" shouted an artist on the shore. "Could you row back out in the middle again? I'm not done painting you yet." "Sure," said George Washington, and the soldiers rowed back out and waited while the artist finished the painting. Nellie used the time to try to type up a story about it. "Gorg Ushington cross the Delaware. Now Gorg Ushington and his freedom fighters have secretly crossed the Delaware River to attack British troops in Philadelphia." "This is an outrage!" she shouted. "No one will be able to read this." "I can read it," said George Washington. "Say, what's that part about attacking British troops?" "Isn't that why you're going to Philadelphia?" "No, we're going to Philadelphia to get a Philly cheesesteak," said George Washington as the boat landed and everyone got out. "You know, thin slices of meat covered in a cheese-like gloop." "We attacked the British a few weeks ago," said Twinklehoof. "Didn't you read it in the news?" "It's already been in the news?" gasped Nellie. "Yeah," said the horse. "That nice fella, Hotshot Terbletsky, wrote a huge front-page story about it." Nellie balled up her story, threw it on the ground, stomped on it, beat it with a stick, and kicked it 187 feet into a handy recycling bin. By this time, George Washington and his horse were miles away, but they could still hear her yelling, "This is an outrage!" Chapter 5. Nellie stopped yelling and looked at her watch. It was already 11 o'clock, and all she had written was a hard-to-read story about what the father of our country was going to have for lunch. That might be good enough for the food page, but it would never make it to the front page. She needed a huge story. And to make matters worse, she couldn't write any story until she got her typewriter fixed. Just then, she heard a crazy clattering and clacketing coming from the other side of the hill. She peered over and saw a guy pushing a wheelbarrow full of typewriters down the road. "Hey, little lady," the man sang. "Ain't it a beautiful day?" "I guess," said Nellie. "Listen, Mr. You can call me Johnny," the man sang. "Johnny Appleseed." "Johnny Appleseed? What are you doing out here with all these typewriters?" "I plant them everywhere I go. My dream is to see typewriter trees growing across this whole beauty. Hold on a second. I thought you went around planting apple seeds," said Nellie. "Oh, a lot of people make that mistake because of my name," said Johnny Appleseed. "But why would I go around planting apple seeds? Apples don't grow from seeds." "Yes, they do," said Nellie. "No, they don't," said Johnny Appleseed. "Yes, they do." "No." "Yes." "No." "Yes." "No." "Yes." "No." "Yes." "Well, we'll just have to agree to disagree," said Johnny Appleseed. "I better get moving along. I've got a lot more typewriters to plant tonight." "Wait," begged Nellie. "Please, can I trade this typewriter that's missing a few keys for one of yours?" "No can do," said Johnny Appleseed. "I need all of these to fulfill my dream of a beautiful land of—" "This is an outrage!" shouted Nellie, and boy howdy, she really meant it. "If you feel that strongly about it," said Johnny Appleseed, "let's check that typewriter tree and see if there are any ripe ones." Nellie watched as Johnny Appleseed climbed up a nearby tree as fast as lightning. A second later, he plucked a brand-new typewriter from a branch. "Here you go, little lady," he said, polishing the typewriter on his sleeve before handing it to her. "Wow! Thanks," said Nellie. "Let me test it out by typing up an interview with you for the Big City Big News." Johnny Appleseed considers career change. "I'm tired of people being confused by my name," said Johnny Appleseed, "so I will no longer plant typewriters." When asked what he would plant instead, Appleseed thought for a minute. "I want to plant something that fits better with my name," he said. "So I think I'll plant Johnny's." When asked if he meant toilets, Appleseed said, "Yeah, you know, a Johnny. I'll travel this land installing a Johnny here and a Johnny there, and pretty soon we'll have a beautiful country full of Johnnies." Definitely not a front-page story. But Nellie figured it would do for the home improvement page. "May I take your picture?" she asked. "Sure. Just let me put on my hat." Click. She got her photo. Then Johnny Appleseed walked off one way, and she walked off the other way, still looking for that huge front-page story she needed. At least she now had a working typewriter. After a while, she arrived in a small town and noticed the Wright brothers' bicycle shop. "Hey, have you guys invented the airplane yet?" she yelled through the window. "Nope," said Wilbur. "Check back next week," said Orville. Nellie kept walking. She passed a computer lab. "Hey, is that computer working yet?" she yelled through the window. "No," said Grace Hopper. "There's a bug in it." "Check back next week," said the bug. Nellie kept walking, and walking, and walking. Finally, she passed a surveyor's office. "Hey, Benjamin Banneker," she yelled through the window. "Have you finished making your wooden clock yet?" "Mm-hmm," said Benjamin Banneker, who was busy working on a map of Washington, D.C. "Well, what time is it?" asked Nellie. Banneker glanced up at the clock. "It's 4:30. 4:30? This is an outrage!" yelled Nellie. "I'm running out of time to get a front-page story. I refuse to get stuck in the underwear section." Extra, extra. Grace Hopper was a pioneer of computers. In fact, she and her team famously found a bug in their computer, which is preserved at the Smithsonian Institution. Admiral Hopper also pushed for the language humans and computers could understand. Learn all about her on Epic in the book Grace Hopper, Computer Scientist by Jill C. Wheeler. Benjamin Banneker was so smart that almost 300 years after his birth, he's still remembered for doing all sorts of smart things, like building a clock out of wood, calculating astronomical events, and giving Thomas Jefferson a piece of his mind on the subject of slavery. Read his story on Epic in Tick-Tock Banneker's Clock by Shanna Keller. Does Nellie get stuck in the underwear section? Find out in Breaking News, Part 3 of 3. Available now.